One of the ways by which we can try to understand Stone Age people is to see if we can do the things that they did. By making stone tools, Peter Jones, a young archaeologist, rediscovers some of the problems of prehistoric man. He is using flint. At first, all Peter's attempts were failures, but now he's really beginning to understand how it was done. Experimental archaeology of this nature is not a new idea, but is now being increasingly used to help to explain how Paleolithic man made and used his stone weapons and tools. Another method of studying Stone Age man is to go to remote parts of the world like the Kalahari Desert, where people are still living at this primitive cultural level. These are primitive men and women who still use stone tools, as their ancestors did before them for thousands of years. We find people like this in Africa, Asia, and Australia. They are known as Aborigines. The study of a living people is called ethnology, and the work of ethnologists often helps us to understand, in more detail, the motives underlying prehistoric cultures. A third method is one that everyone will recognize. We search for and we study the things that prehistoric people left behind them. The exact situation in which we find the remains often helps us to date them. This is a chipped pebble. Tools of this type were made and used by primitive kinds of men who lived 2.5 million years ago. Tools of this rather more sophisticated kind began to be made about 1 million years later. They're called hand axes. All these tools belong to the earlier part of our period and are called Lower Paleolithic. Around 100,000 years ago, tools of this more advanced kind began to be used. This is Middle Paleolithic, the period of Neanderthal man. About 40,000 years ago, yet more advances in tool-making occurred at the beginning of the Upper Paleolithic period. Tools like this were made by men very much like ourselves. Upper Paleolithic societies left us very special evidence of their existence. Paintings that are preserved in the shelter of caves. They're mostly of the animals they hunted for food and skins. Can you remember the 3 methods used by archaeologists? This one is the traditional method, discovering and looking at remains from the past. The second method is called ethnology, a study of living peoples who still live much as Stone Age hunters did. third method is the experimental method, trying to do the things that people did in the past. Man has been described as a naked ape, but there are many differences other than hairiness. Both men and apes are descended from a common ancestor, a tiny tree-climbing creature that probably lived over 70 million years ago. From this creature, many species of apes have evolved. Baboons, orangutan, lemurs, chimpanzees, and gorillas. And in the past, there have also been many species of man. Today, only one species of man remains, and all men, irrespective of color or of culture, are of the same species. Biologists call man Homo sapiens sapiens, which means the clever man. This species first appeared at the beginning of the Upper Palaeolithic period. This skull is 1.5 million years old, but some form of man has existed for at least 3 million years. This seems a long time, but it's very short when compared with the records of other creatures. Birds, for example, have been flying around for more than 100 million years. The ancestors of this reptile were here 250 million years ago. And fishes have swum in the world's oceans for 400 million years. It all makes our 3 million years seem very short, but it's still very long compared with the life of one man. What is even more remarkable, Paleolithic man, the men of the Stone Age, occupy over 99% of man's time on Earth, and all the rest of prehistory and history is crammed into this tiny section at the end. We differ from other animals in many ways. One of the most important is that we are very skilled in the making and using of tools. Equally important is our ability to evolve complex languages, and so pass on ideas to other people, both in speech and by symbols. We can use and control fire, and we can solve the most complex problems. But what about our ancestors? All men today, however primitive, can use fire and speech, and can make tools. They understand and use symbols. This man is showing us how to track animals. The marks he is making represent kangaroo tracks. And they can evolve very complex ideas. Just look at the skill with which this man constructs a trap for catching animals. All these things could have been done by prehistoric man, but we shall require further evidence. One thing that we must not be influenced by is the climate. For some of the period during which Paleolithic man lived, the climate was temperate. At other times, it was extremely cold. And there were thousands of years when, even in Europe, the climate was tropical. Many species of animals, and many men, failed to adapt to changing climatic conditions. That man himself survived and developed to Homo sapiens sapiens must largely have been due to his ability to produce tools. The earliest, as we have seen, were just chipped pebbles. Later came the hand axe, a general-purpose tool with a point for making holes, a sharp edge for cutting, and a useful heavy butt. Tools like this are often called core tools, They were shaped by flaking from a lump of stone. Man, however, did not neglect the flakes which he struck off when making hand axes, because these were particularly good for making sharp cutting tools. And this is an actual prehistoric knife being used to cut a tough piece of meat. The Middle and Upper Paleolithic periods specialized in making flake tools. These two were fine piercing instruments. Probably at all times men used wooden spears, pointed and hardened by burning away the end. The shape of many Upper Paleolithic tools shows that they were made to fit a shaft. At this time, spear throwers were sometimes used. This one is of bone, rather nicely decorated. How was it used? Well, let us use our second method of investigation, ethnology. Here, Australian Aborigines are using an almost identical instrument to aim a stone-tipped spear at an animal. Now let us use our third method, experiment. Using the prehistoric spear thrower, we'll copy the Aborigines. It works. It worked then, and it works now. We are looking at a modern Stone Age community gathering their daily food. The women and children gather roots and berries, insects and small animals, while the men are away hunting larger animals. Perhaps men and women a million or 2 years ago shared the responsibility in exactly the same way. We can never be sure. We do know that they used fire. Perhaps they discovered this from natural bushfires. If so, it would have to have been kept burning night and day, for bushfires can hardly have been commonplace. Ironstone and flint will make a spark and are sometimes found on prehistoric sites. Or perhaps they made a fire like the Kalahari Bushmen with 2 pieces of wood. To investigate the cooking habits of prehistoric societies, we must use the traditional archaeological methods of investigation, always the most reliable. Prehistoric man sometimes sheltered in caves, and when he did, the cave preserved the things that he used. Here, generation after generation of Paleolithic man gathered, and today, perhaps 20,000 years later, the hearths may remain, cold and deserted. Here are bones, food debris, and tools on the cave floor. In the deep recesses of caves, we sometimes find the paintings done by Paleolithic man, finely drawn pictures of the animals that they knew and hunted. Nobody knows why they made these drawings, but some archaeologists believe that they may have been connected with the religious beliefs of a hunting people. Often the animals seem to be drawn with wounds. Using the ethnological approach once more, we find rather similar paintings made by the Bushmen. One Paleolithic painting at least shows a man dressed as an animal. Did they think that this helped in the hunt? Was he a man of magic? We do not really know, but look at the deer antlers that he's wearing. Sometimes among late prehistoric relics, there have been found parts of deer skulls with holes bored so that men could wear them on their heads. What was it all about? We can never be certain. But it is interesting to note that modern Aborigines imitate animals in mime and believe that this is a good thing and ensures a plentiful supply of meat. They also paint their bodies in much the same way as the cave painting that we saw. It seems likely that all these things had a ceremonial, even a magical significance to prehistoric men, just as they have to their modern counterpart, the Aborigines. Magic in dancing, magic in painting, magic in chanting. Perhaps. And perhaps also magic in the little upper Paleolithic statuettes that we sometimes find among the flint tools and the bones. We are only at the beginning of our search for the truth concerning Paleolithic society, and a great deal is still hypothesis. We believe that they evolved incredibly slowly. Over 2 million years might separate the making of tools like this from tools like this. We know that of many species of man, only one has survived, and that all men today, irrespective of race, are of the same species. We know that Paleolithic man was a great hunter, and that by the end of the period, some of his number were accomplished artists. We know that he survived great ice ages and adapted himself to much warmer conditions than today. And we know that in some parts of the world, man has never really advanced beyond this cultural and technological level.
Next in the series, Wildlife Australia, Exploration North looks at the hidden coast of